So today we're exposing shill stoppers, more like shill droppers. The guy seems to think that he's got some sort of evidence based on the experiments done by a couple of Russian cinematographers, and he's supposedly debunking the work done by Mythbusters. But I'm going to show you that the evidence that he shows is falsified. And this is what his evidence is based around. It's an image of Buzz Aldrin just getting down off the ladder of the lunar module, and Neil Armstrong's actually taking the photo. So let's see what he has to say.
Okay, welcome to another episode of Shill Stoppers. Today we're going to talk about a couple of shills, well known as Mythbusters. My ass.
His ass?
Was the landing
What?
by U.S. astronauts on the moon a hoax? Did NASA fabricate the Apollo record? Did Neil Armstrong take his first steps in a studio? These questions were addressed in the U.S. show Mythbusters episode 104 in 2008. During the program, a photograph of an astronaut in the shadow of the lunar module was examined. Apollo skeptics claimed that additional lighting was used in this scene. The astronaut can be seen clearly, despite the fact that he is in the shadow of the lunar module. There is only one light source on the moon, the sun. Apollo skeptics also state that there must have been another source of light, which accounts for the astronaut being so well illuminated. Can the sunlight reflected from the lunar surface illuminate the astronaut to such an extent? To investigate this question, Mythbusters recreated in a studio similar conditions to those on the lunar surface. A single source of light, surface material that reflects 8% of light, and a model astronaut on the shadow side of the lunar module who was incorrectly named Armstrong, but of course it was actually Aldrin descending the ladder. Needless to say, the conclusion reached by Mythbusters was that the light reflected from the lunar surface was indeed enough to get such a well-exposed shot of the astronaut. But when verification of this conclusion was undertaken by two Russian cinematographers, Yuri Elkov and Leonid Konovlov, by recreating the shooting conditions as on the, quote, moon, but in a studio, they reached a completely different result. The model astronaut standing in the shadow was very dark, not as in the NASA photo of Aldrin. Moreover, two cinematographers found that the Mythbusters must have resorted to fraud. Initially, the Mythbusters got a negative result, but they then allegedly falsified the actual shooting conditions and reshot everything.
In short, the two Russian guys simulated the conditions in which this image was taken in a studio, took the photo. The astronaut wasn't as well lit as in this image, according to them, and that makes this image fake, and it also makes what Mythbusters done invalid. So here is the image that Mythbusters done. Theirs is on the right hand side, the original is on the left. And basically I watched their clip. They only took the photo once as far as I can see from what they've shown. So all of this is just alleged and is basically no proof of anything. There is no evidence there whatsoever. So let's see where it goes now.
The two cinematographers, Yuri Elkov and Leonid Konovlov, decided to repeat the Mythbusters experiment and verify whether the lunar surface light can actually illuminate the astronaut to such an extent as in NASA's well-known picture sequence. First, to simulate the lunar regolith, soil samples with different reflectivity were selected. A standard grayscale diffusely reflects 18% of light. The moon has light areas, which are called highlands, where albedo of the lunar surface is 12 to 13%, and there are dark areas, the so-called Mario. According to the Apollo 11 record, astronauts landed at the Sea of Tranquility, where the albedo is 7 to 8%. The soil in the bucket approximately corresponds to the reflection coefficient of the lunar regolith. It is 2 times darker than the standard grayscale. The surface is sprinkled with regolith. The walls of the studio are draped in black velvet. There are still a few light sources, including the ceiling lights.
Now take note of this image. We'll come back to this a little later, but it looks way too well lit and there's no darks anywhere. So if this is what the Mythbusters supposedly did, well, you're wrong. Sorry.
A scale model of a lunar module is set up in the correct orientation, with the ladder in full shadow. The upper lights are not yet turned off. Now all the overhead lights are turned off, and only one source of light remains, the one simulating sunlight. This is how the model astronaut appears in this light. In this picture, the image was artificially lightened in a way to preserve the regolith texture. According to NASA, the snapshot of the astronaut in the shadow of the lunar module was taken on 70mm reversal Kodak color film ISO 160 by a medium format Hasselblad camera.
Now take note of the ISO of the film that NASA used. It was 160.
A medium format camera was also used for this exercise, virtually the same design as the Hasselblad, and photographed on Kodak color film ISO 100.
So, NASA used ISO 160 film. These guys decided to use ISO 100 film. The lower the ISO number, the more insensitive the film is, or the more insensitive the camera is to light. In other words, it takes a longer exposure time to get the same amount of exposure. So in actual fact, they didn't simulate the conditions perfectly, and the result will be the image won't look the same. This guy is only perpetuating and spreading the lie that they've created.
This is the camera with a detachable film magazine. To prevent the photographer's face and clothes from acting as a reflective or additional source of light, the photographer wore black gloves and a black gown, which reflects 3 to 4% of the light. But how else could this shot be taken? I'll get back to that, but for now, here are the initial results. They were examined in detail. The model astronaut's boots are completely dark. There is no light that can hit such a low point. The upper part of the helmet is also in darkness. The helmet cannot be lit from above by anything. We see reflected light on the PLSS and on his legs. This is reflected light from the illuminated lunar surface behind him. And now observe the difference. The horizon of the NASA photograph is correctly aligned.
So these guys went to all of this trouble to make sure that there was no light reflected off them. They neglected to think of the astronaut that actually took the image and the light that would be reflected off his suit. They also ignored the fact that the ISO film used was 160 and they went with 100, which would have ended up giving an underexposed image like you see here. And basically their experiment's false. Their experiment is invalid. So if you look in the foreground of their simulated image on the left, you'll see that the light level in the foreground there on the ground is not nearly what it is on the right hand side image, which is just testimony to this underexposure problem. The light levels aren't right and the experiment's invalid. So look at the original on the right hand side. Just look behind the astronaut's back at the ground there. It appears absolutely brilliantly white. If you look behind the astronaut's back on the left hand image, you'll see that it looks yellow. It's not as exposed. So as far as I'm concerned, that experiment is invalid and the findings of this video are invalid.
Not clear what the astronaut was actually doing. Is he supposed to be ascending or descending the ladder? Why was he leaning at a 45-degree angle? Was it possible to descend the ladder in such a fashion? Maybe he'd been standing for a photographer for too long of a time, got tired of waiting, decided to take a little break on his knees. Or maybe the original photograph was of a tiny figurine as well. Who knows?
So here is a sleight of hand, very underhanded deception created by this guy, and this is the sort of thing you need to really keep an eye out for. If you look at this image, it is skewed. You can actually see the image is skewed to make it look like he's on more of an angle than what he actually is. If you look at the original, you will actually see that the ladder is more upright and he's actually skewed the image. You can see the edges of the image there are like a parallelogram. If we go back to the original and then you look at the ladder, it's on more of a lean. The astronaut himself is on more of a lean. So he's trying to deceive you again. Just look at that.
So the question remains, from where did so much light emanate in NASA's picture? Maybe I can answer that question in a 30-second video. Let's take a look.
So it appears this guy didn't write out the captions for this, and basically he's gone with the automatic captions and it's coming out as gobbledygook, so we don't actually know what these two Russian guys were saying.
Finally, here are are the two pictures for comparison. The astronaut in the shadow of the lunar module with one light source, and another frame with the model astronaut illuminated from the camera position with a powerful source of diffused light. The conclusion reached is unambiguous. NASA's photo is fake. This picture cannot have been taken on the moon, but in a studio with a very strong additional source of illumination from near the camera. A special thanks to Yuri Elkov and Leonid Konovlov. Good luck to you both.
What the hell? Thanks for what? Use an ISO 100 film instead of ISO 160 so you can call out NASA when your image come out underexposed compared to theirs. And then as for this guy, just perpetuating the lie and calling out Mythbusters and saying what they done was fake. What a load of crap. Seriously, get a life. If you're going to do the experiment, do it perfectly. Simulate all of the conditions. Same film, same light levels. I bet the light levels weren't even the same. I mean, if you compare the original image to this crap, you can see that in the foreground and the background of the original, the ground looks like bright white. Here you can see that the ground looks like brown. You can see the colour of the ground. In the original, you can't see the colour of the ground. So there's obviously some sort of an exposure issue here. So shill stoppers have just jumped on the bandwagon because this went along with whatever he believed, and unfortunately for him, it's been shown to be all falsified. The lesson here is, before you go using somebody else's work, do the research thoroughly, make sure they're on the level, otherwise you'll end up just promoting somebody else's lies. Anyway, plenty more to come. I've got another one of his videos to cover shortly, which I'll probably do in the next day or so. Have a great day. Please be truthful to one another, and I'll see you later.